And the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Hello and welcome to the only independent news and opinion program where we chronicle two distinct possibilities. Either the demise and possible extinction of the Homo sapien, or the greatest leap forward in human history. One thing is certain, there is no status quo. This is the Daily Australian Radio Show, episode number 62 for Tuesday, April the 1st, 2025. My name is Jason Olborn. Yes, that is my real name, and I'm joined by Nicola Charles. Here she is right now. Welcome back to the show on April Fools.
Oh, good morning, Jason. Good morning, listeners. I'm absolutely delighted. I've been asked to run for the lower house and then eventually become Prime Minister of Australia because I love the country so much. And everyone's going to support me, and we've got all this funding, and it's so exciting. Not really. April Fools.
I was going to use the exact same story.
Oh, God, we wish Nicola Charles was the PM. We'd be so happy. I would make sure that all of these trees that drop leaves in the street in Australia had some little friends appear next to them, and they'd all be fruit trees, and we could just have fruit falling from the trees in every suburb, and people could help themselves, and they wouldn't have to go to the greedy supermarkets. There'd be all sorts of utopia-like things that I would bring to this country, which probably means it's never going to happen. Instead, Jason, we get stories like this. Council bins are quietly being fitted with tracking technology, revealing all your dirty secrets. That is a headline in news.com.au. Check this out. I'm going to check mine later. I was too busy yesterday. Your rubbish could be spying on you as well as guarding your grime. It might be disclosing your dirty habits. Your wheelie bin could be revealing all. Residents in Sydney's inner west were surprised this month when the local council began placing municipal bins, many of which were in perfect working order. They were even more surprised when it was revealed there was a hidden addition to their shiny new bin, and it was telling councils about their filthy habits. Sydney's Inner West Council has begun rolling out 35,000 new wheelie bins. Just under the rim of the new bin, away from prying eyes, is a small circular device, a radio frequency identification device, RFID. It's part of an increasing march of the so-called Internet of Things, which sees everyday objects from fridges to kettles collect data on how they're used. Connected fridges can tell when products are expiring. Oh, yeah, that's why it's there. Connected bins could tell when you haven't done enough recycling. This is ridiculous, Jason. This is ridiculous. If I find one of these things on my bin, I'm taking it off because it hasn't had my permission to be on my property. So I've given permission for the bin, and we pay in our rates for the bin. And by the way, I'm going to give you a tip. I'm going to give you listeners a tip. A farmer near me does this. He has no council bins, right? He gets not a giant one. It's quite big, though. It's about the size of 8 council bins put together. He gets from a private company one of those mini skips with a lid that you see at businesses that you put up, and he puts it at the gateway to his property, so it's not near his house. And once a month, a private company come and collect it for him. And you know what? He can put whatever he wants in it, Jason. It's one rule for the rich and another for the rest of us.
That's a good point. Well, maybe that's what people need to do, is to have a big bin with a lid on it at the end of each street. And maybe they can have a public rubbish service. That'd be something different, wouldn't it?
Well, who do they think they are telling us what to do with our trash? And, you know, they don't say anything to these companies that wrap everything in plastic and all these things that don't need to be around the food. Where do they expect them to put us? You don't want to burn them. They've got chemicals in them. It's just another step too far, isn't it? I mean, as I said, I'm worried when I go to the toilet, Jason, where the information is going. I really am.
I totally agree with you. Well, I think that there could be one good use for an RFID chip. What if we put them on public servants? What if we put them on politicians so that we could know how they use their brain, or in fact don't use their brain?
Well, I've said before, I definitely think these people should have digital ID. I want to know. I think I put a post up yesterday and I said, because Anthony Albanese is refusing to ask questions left and right. Why would he? He only represents the public. I want to know, would he be prepared, as we're all asked sometimes, to undergo a medical to start your job? I know actors are asked that, and some people are asked in the corporate world before they invest their time and energy in you, if you're healthy. If we could find out if Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton have the presence of spike protein in their blood, because if they don't, well, I'm afraid they're a danger to society and they probably shouldn't be in charge. So I'd like that. And also to ask him, who has he met in just the last week, privately or publicly, in his role as Prime Minister, as a public servant, and what was discussed and where are the minutes? Now, we are absolutely within our rights to ask that, Jason, and we get none of that information anymore.
The fact that you are in the right, you have the right to ask the question and you don't get a response, that is the answer.
Yes.
Because it tells you that there's a cover-up. And so now we're faced with a really interesting scenario, and that is to opt in or to opt out. Now, I know that there's always been a groundswell of opinion, certainly amongst those that have been supporters of Ricardo Bossi, another person who refuses to be interviewed by me, despite many approaches, different things, met him personally, shook his hand, have a photograph with him. I find it frustrating because Bossi's supporters want to opt out of the system, not vote, and tell you that the system is fraudulent. Okay, great. Glad you got that standpoint. Don't disagree with everything that you're saying. But my problem is, how are you guys going to crash the system? By just building up and blackpilling everyone until they can't handle it anymore? Politics is about momentum, and the opposite of momentum is inertia. And blackpilling creates negativity, which creates depression, which creates inertia. So it's counterintuitive to be totally a blackpiller. You have to have a positive spin, which gets you out of bed in the morning to get you up. Mm-hmm. So I don't believe opting out is the solution. But at the same time, I'll tell you right now, there is not a single politician that has ever been born that is perfect. They do not exist. No. And most of them have been forced to do bad things to good people for whom they trust in order to stay in the game or stay ahead of the game. And that is a tragedy and a blight on the human condition.
It really is. And there's a movement in Australia now with some quite big groups for Australians. And if you're listening overseas, it's quite unusual here because this is not the case in the UK. It's actually against the law not to vote in an election in Australia, which I find interesting. But there's a massive groundswell, a massive movement to not vote in this upcoming election. Now, here's the thing about that. I understand where you're coming from emotionally. You don't want to put pen to paper or pencil to paper, hopefully it's a pen, and contribute to in any way to what you see as the game, the machine, the fraud, these politicians that are clearly behaving in an unconstitutional way, and they're clearly taking their instructions and their orders from overseas, which is foreign interference. And I am definitely there with you. However, they have created a society strategically, and this was strategic, so that you'd feel that way. Because enough migrants, and this has been in the establishment media, enough migrants have now come into Australia that little margin that they used to win or lose by, they are now able to tilt more in their favour. So I would actually recommend the opposite. If you want to be an interrupter and a disruptor of what they're planning and what they're doing, you must vote. You must vote against them, obviously, and not put them as any of your preferences. You know, a good person said to me the other day, here's my preferences, and it's all these independents and all these freedom people, and then I've put Labour last. And I said, well, your vote's going to go to Labour. That's how that's going to work, because the preference system is whack. But if you decide not to vote, Australians, in the upcoming election, and I'm not here to tell you what to do, you are handing control of this country to the new Australians. And who let the new Australians in? And who let the new Australians rapidly become citizens? They're all voting. I've been in Australia for over 30 years and I can't vote because I've been advised not to give up my British passport and my British citizenship, which in itself is concerning, that I've been advised that by a sitting politician. But you are literally, you look at what's going on and you say you don't like it, you will be contributing to that if you don't vote. So my advice to you, even though these people have betrayed us so poorly, is to interrupt them by putting pen to paper.
Well said. Well, I'm gonna talk on this in a slightly different tangent. So the people that say crash the system, opt out of the system, my argument is that go if you want to, but I think there's another strategy. And I'll give you the history. When I was in the Labor Party, I progressed in my local branch, was the junior vice president, was very active, very motivated, very innovative. A couple of little things that we wrote became policy, in actual fact. In fact, John Howard ended up picking up a policy that I wrote at Quakers Hill for the Labor Party, and he picked it up. And what it was tax-free interest-bearing accounts for first home buyers. I made that up, and a few months later, Howard announced it as an election policy. So that was pretty cool. That's how quickly it came through the system. Maybe it was someone else in the Liberal Party thought of the exact same thing. I doubt it. When I would get into situations that I was completely unhappy with things that the Labor Party were doing, I would often have chats with my president of my branch, fabulous man. He was an ex-tradesman. He'd been in the game for 30 years, and he looked like Morgan Freeman, which was pretty cool as well. And we would have these chats, and he would say to me, Jason, don't quit the party. You must not fight from without. You have to fight from within. You can only affect change from within. You can't do much from outside.
That is true.
And I agreed with him to a point until a particular member of parliament came to me one day and told me about a leadership spill that was going to install Christina Keneally and told me that I must support it. And that was my line in the sand because I knew where it was coming from. It was an Eddie Obeid play, and I said I won't have any part of it. And Eddie Obeid's going to jail, which he did. And the MP said, no, mate, won't happen. And it did. So I was right. And on that moment, I turned around, picked up my backpack that I took to every branch meeting with whatever I had in, I don't remember.
Such a lefty.
And I walked out the door, and I never turned my head, not once, to say goodbye to anyone. And I never heard from anyone ever again. And I was a pre-selected, I was in a pre-selection in 2000.
You know what that was? That was someone with morality and principles walking out the door. So they're not going to contact you and they're not going to say anything to you because just your action proved the difference between you and them.
Exactly. Now, here's where I'm going. If you support opting out of voting in a compulsory voting environment, community, society, I'm going to say this. I think use your weakness as your strength. That's the motto that's going on my headstone when I go eventually, even though I said to my wife I would prefer to be cremated and shot out into space. But where I'm going is I think the correct strategy is to develop a policy for non-compulsory voting because I think that has a much bigger stance. Now, here's my point. How many people, certainly I know from handing out on the day, there are so many people that begrudgingly walk into a polling booth and go, oh, give me the cards, I got to vote, or who cares? And they walk outside and they go, that's it, done for another 3 years. Like, my God, you've been imposed to have a say in the direction of your future, and you had to literally spend 6 minutes to park the car, walk in, go inside, mark your name off and write number one and some other numbers on a piece of paper and leave, and they think that's too much. So these people are typically not informed. So I'm saying if you want to go down this pathway, you could affect massive change in this country by changing the rules of voting. If you don't want to vote, make it official that you don't have to vote, introduce non-compulsory voting and watch the system change. Because if you then only have educated people that are going to vote or people that are politically interested, we've seen the numbers in the UK. They're devastating. They're like 30%, 40% of voting. That's all. The US never gets more than 50%. Now, it may create the possibility of election fraud. That's a different thing. And we've got ways here because we have pen and paper. We don't have machines. At least we've got that protection. But let's look at this. Turn your weakness into your strength. You don't like vaccines? Make a policy that says politicians must take them first. You don't like digital ID? Make the politicians use digital ID for 5 years before they give it to anyone else. Don't like RFID chips in your head? Put them in politicians' heads for 5 years and see what happens. That's how you change things in the right direction. And you watch these politicians backpedal. If they don't like it for themselves and they have to be the guinea pigs, watch what happens. This is real power. And this is not opting out and being, I don't like the system and taking your bat and ball and going home. This is using and taking the gloves off against the people that have done you a disservice, and you change it for the better because that's what you do. Now, I know as I'm saying this, I feel something like a motivation just shivers up my spine because I know this is how we build power in this country. This is what real Australians do. We fight, we don't run. We don't turn our backs, we face the enemy and we look at them like Mel Gibson in Lethal Weapon and we say, do you really wanna? Well, let's take you on, you bastards, because you're all weak. We know you're weak. You're not good enough for what we demand. And yes, we are idealists and we're also centrists. And this is a policy that we can change. Let's say non-compulsory voting, get rid of all the wood ducks that don't know what they're talking about, that go along to get along. It immediately weakens mainstream media because the people who don't want to vote, don't care, won't watch the news, doesn't matter. And they can't be influenced by people like Albanese filtering out questions he doesn't want and standing there and holding a baby, happy clapping and offering you $5 a week.
Look, you know, I'm British and I've been here over 30 years. I've paid a lot of taxes in this country. So I feel I've earned the right, you know, when I was on television, not now. Not now, I'm a regular. But I feel I've earned the right to sort of have my say in my speech. I've had children in America, so I've got a couple of American children. I lived there for 7 years, wasn't my choice, and did everything I could to get out. Not any reflection on America. I just wanted to live in Australia. And so, you know, we have these ties in the family to America and we could go to America if we wanted to, but not everyone has that option. So let's say love or hate Donald Trump. Donald Trump says to, you know, Australians, the OGs, you can come to America. We will set up the employment system so that it's fair, like DEI kind of fair, so that Australians get priority for employment in America. We will give you a lovely house in a lovely suburb. We will pay you money every week. And we will take care of you, you know, to make your life and transition to come to America. And you can have 6 to 8 children. We'll make it very, very easy. Probably at the next election, you'd vote for him because he'd helped you in such a huge way go to America. Well, that's what we're facing in Australia. All of these people do not yet understand our political system. For them, it's only been of benefit. So what's going to happen, without a doubt, is they are going to vote for the status quo. You say on the show, Jason, there is no status quo. There is for them. Because as bad as we've seen our quality of life and our wealth and our prospects and our health go down the tubes because of our political structure and the way they've run it, for the people coming from other countries, this is better. Even though it's worse for us, it's gone down, it's better than where they've come from. So they are going to vote for the status quo, which means when they talk about equity, it isn't about making people who've come from less level up and get a life as good as ours. It's about making our life level down and be as bad as theirs was or their new life is. So I understand completely what you're saying. I understand that there are lots of rumors flying around, quite large groups in Australia, about various politicians. Everyone's concerned about Freemasonry. Everyone's worried about, now they're panicking. Your backs are in the corner about who's a good guy and who's a bad guy. Let me just reassure you that behind the scenes, Jason and I are listening. We're hearing what you're saying and we're researching what you're sending to us. And we are not going to comment on things we are not fully across. But as soon as we are fully across the details of what is being discussed among you, the most important people in this country, the OG Australians, the original gangsters, we will discuss on this show. And just know that my advice, and I can't tell you what to do, but my advice, do not give up that vote, Jason. Do not give it up.
No, absolutely. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, and I'll make these 2 points. Whatever the third party movement will become, when it becomes powerful enough to take government in this country and actually change the future, that has not formed yet. It's not even close. It's not even in a gestation period. We are just at the beginnings of a willingness to mate, if that makes sense. And I'll add to that the leader of the freedom third party, whatever movement, the first alternative prime minister, let's call it the Joseph Lyons or the Robert Menzies, has yet to emerge. There is no current leader. There's a few contenders, but at the same time, all of these people are not qualified and haven't shown that they can be the leader of the movement. So in other words, it's a work in progress. And we have said for some time now that 2025 is not the election that's going to be the big one. In fact, it could get worse than 2022. But that's not to say that we ever give up. But it is on us, if we don't try, to then blame the system if it collapses because we haven't contributed. There's ways that we all need to contribute towards it. But at the same time, if the system is broken, and that includes the third parties and the major parties, then that's what it is. And we've already pointed out there's plenty of criticism amongst it. What we're trying to do is point to where the power is and where the positives are and how we create a new system that benefits us, benefits all of us. But here's the point. In politics, the only way that you can affect change is that in any group, in any decision, black, white, left, right, up, down, whatever, that you have to, whichever body is able to affect authority and change, you have to get 51% support. You have to get it either through a vote or you've got to get the minister to agree before he affects a policy. You have to. That's why Trump plays this the way he's talking about it. Everything comes down to a left-right decision, a yes-no, an up-down. That's the only way it changes. So I know.
I think in life, Jason, throughout history, basically, we've always had a choice. We say it a lot between, crap and crapper, dumb and dumber, right? And unfortunately, that's the case that it's been. We've been told in the history books there has been, but there's been no in reality, good guys versus bad guys. We were told that was the case in the First World War and the Second World War, but we don't really know because there was a lot of bad going on both sides. Same with the French Revolution, funded on both sides by the Rothschild banking family. And it's the same now with what's going on in Ukraine. It's the same with what's going on in Gaza. There's no good guy and bad guy. We've got to get away from this West Side Story scenario. And they've really got us into this. And this is why politics is seen as left and right, blue or red. You've only got these choices and, minor voices can't be heard. That's the thing we've got to change, right? They're reducing our choices down as much as they can. And all I'm saying is, even if you muddy the waters, even if you, in England, we would say, put a spanner in the works, right? You throw a spanner into an engine and it stops working. And, as is said at the beginning of this show, this is just us putting our bodies against the wheels and the gears of a grinding machine that we now know is clearly, on the whole, working against us, working to deplete our wealth, to deplete now, we know for sure after the last 5 years, our peace of mind and our health, which is a very dark side of it. But, we used to plan things in this country that were fun to do at the weekend. We used to plan holidays, multiple holidays a year. We used to talk about things that we were going to do that would improve our family situation. No one has the freedom and the peace of mind to do that anymore. And they have made everything a struggle. It is a 24 hours a day, 7 days a week struggle, even for me, and I was an actress on television and every single day is a struggle. And so putting the spanner in the works, and at least maybe the machine will keep running, but maybe it will grind a bit because we're a thorn in its side. We're a problem. We want to stand up and have our say. We want to have our freedom of speech. We're not going to be told that if a country commits genocide on another country, we're not allowed to even talk about it. There seems to be a lot of genocide going on, in the Western world right now with all kinds of avenues, and we're not allowed to talk about it. We know we're not allowed to talk about it. We're censored and deplatformed. So keep being a thorn in their side. If that's all we can be. And I've said before, we're the tiny little people on the ground, and they're these big T-Rexes, these machines of power, and they're battling it out for money and control. We used to see it in the old movies. Even if you can get a little spear and stick it in the toe of that dino and bring it down, that's what we've got to do. And walking away and throwing your hands in the air and saying, I can't be bothered. I'm not voting. I'm having nothing to do with it. People will die. People will actually die. People you don't know. So maybe that's okay to you. But people you don't know will die if you walk away. And I know that's a very dramatic thing to say, but it is true, right? It's that butterfly wing theory, right? It's the bug that went cuckoo. If you've ever read Dr. Seuss, your action, your small action or non-action will have a big effect further down the track.
Yes, it will. It's very, very powerful, and I'm delighted that we're able to provide plenty of perspective to encourage discussion and debate. And thanks everyone for your comments. Really appreciate it. And we were overwhelmed by really positive feedback. And likewise, we'll accept the criticism. I won't accept criticism from trolls. I'll certainly challenge those guys that want to have a go. But having said that, you can tell the difference when there is criticism. If you let us know what you think.
Intelligent criticism is great. I love it.
Absolutely, and it only makes all of us better at what we do. So thanks everyone. There's so much to discuss in this topic. This is ongoing, so we'll keep going. What I want to do now is I want to get into the news. There's plenty of big stories that we need to discuss today in the remaining time that we have. We're already halfway through the show. But again, what you're going to hear in the news is going to blow your minds yet again. How about we get started?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So the French leader of the National Rally Party, Marine Le Pen, has been barred from competing for the presidency in 2027 after a court found her guilty of a vast system of embezzlement of European Parliament funds and banned her from running for public office with immediate effect. The RN, the single largest party in the French Parliament, reacted with fury, calling the sentence a travesty and an attack on democracy. The party was backed by some politicians on the traditional right. Now, she's been convicted of this embezzlement, handed a 5-year ban from public office. She will also, the judge gave her a 4-year prison sentence, of which 2 years are suspended and the rest served under home detention, and a €100,000 fine. Meanwhile, the president of the RN party, Jordan Bardella, who's just 29 years of old, who could be seen as a replacement presidential candidate despite his relative inexperience, said, "Today is not only Marine Le Pen who was just unjustly condemned, it was French democracy that was killed." So the argument here is that the charges were bogus and it was another example of lawfare to take out your political opponents. This is what's going on here, guys. Globalism versus nationalism in real time. Meanwhile, in Myanmar, announced Friday, its a major earthquake had led to the deaths of over 2,000 people. A spokesperson said 270 more people were still missing, with nearly 4,000 injured. Predictive modelling estimates from the US Geological Survey, which monitors seismic activity, suggest the death toll could eventually reach well over 10,000. The WHO said at least 3 hospitals were destroyed and 22 were partly damaged, with the scale of deaths and injuries is not yet fully understood. The agency issued an urgent flash appeal for $8 million for emergency support. Why wouldn't WHO have $8 million? Meanwhile, Myanmar has declared a week of national mourning with national flags to fly at half-mast. Virginia Giuffre, who was sex trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein and claims she was sexually assaulted as a teenager by Prince Andrew, says she's been given just 4 days to live after a car crash. Miss Giuffre, previously known as Virginia Roberts, who's 41, shared a photograph of herself from a hospital bed, covered in bruises, and said she'd suffered in a smash with a speeding bus. Posting to Instagram on Sunday, the survivor said she has suffered kidney failure and begged to see her children one last time before she dies. Murdoch Media throws out 2 more headlines to bash Trump today, declaring Greenland plans to be diabolical and that Trump is seeking a 3rd term as president, where the writer explores pathways to do it whilst explaining Trump's ability to grab headlines whilst making headlines with their own story. Denmark has not kept pace and devoted the resources necessary to keep their base, to keep our troops, and in my view, to keep the people of Greenland safe from a lot of very aggressive incursions from Russia, from China and other nations, said Donald Trump about Greenland. A lot of other countries have threatened Greenland, have threatened to use its territories and its waterways to threaten the US, to threaten Canada, and of course, to threaten the people of Greenland. A new Guardian Essential poll says that Albanese's approval rating takes a hit, but Labor inches ahead of the coalition. Voters scored both PM and Peter Dutton's poorly on key leadership questions, including trust, funny that, competence, and being out of touch. Essential's 2PP plus measure, which allows voters to remain undecided, but put Labor ahead 48 to 47 with 5% undecided. The survey, only of 1,100 people, was a piece with major polls from Newspoll, Resolve and YouGov, which showed small improvements toward Labor in recent weeks. It's like negotiating with terrorists. It continued a small steady upstick in support for Labor after the last two polls put them at 47 apiece and 47 to 48 against with the coalition. These polls suggest, though, that no party is likely to have a majority after the federal election on the 3rd of May. Great big schmozzle for the next parliament. All the better for it. Peter Dutton faced a pub test interview with Sky News' Paul Murray and discussed the usual stories of cost of living, rents, tradies and wokeism. When asked by an audience member about defence, he replied, Mr Dutton said he would support defence acquisition requests, including a further squadron of F-35s, a type of stealth strike fighter jet, more funding towards AUKUS, and a boost to the Guided Weapons Enterprise Plan, which has been criticised in recent years for its slow pace of its planned rollout. Elon Musk dropped a bombshell at the weekend during a fiery 100-minute town hall in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Musk unveiled a shocking chart, a dramatic spike in social security numbers issued to non-citizens, soaring from 270,000 in 2021 to a mind-blowing 2.1 million in 2024. So these are non-citizens given social security numbers. That's almost 5 million non-citizens now embedded in the system collecting benefits, draining taxpayer dollars, and most alarmingly, infiltrating the voter rolls. This is a mind-blowing chart, Musk declared, pointing to the data. This wasn't an accident. This was a massive, large-scale program under the Biden administration to import as many illegals as possible, ultimately to change the voting map of the US, disenfranchise the American people, and lock in a permanent deep blue one-party state from which there'd be no escape. UK Department of Education data revealed a child aged 3 or 4 was suspended from a state school for abuse against sexual orientation and gender identity during the 2022/23 academic year. The specific school and further details of the case have not been disclosed. However, the toddler was not alone in facing disciplinary action for such behaviour. Further data published in the Telegraph shows that 94 pupils at state primary schools were suspended or permanently excluded for transphobia and homophobia during the same academic year. President Trump commuted the sentence of another Hunter Biden associate. What's that about? Trump commuted the sentence of Jason Galanis, who was serving a 14-year federal prison sentence for defrauding an Indian tribe. Hunter's former business partner Devon Archer and Galanis sought to defraud the Wakpamni Lake Community Corp, the business faction of the Oglala Sioux tribe of South Dakota's Lake Community Tribe. Last year, Galanis cooperated with House Republicans and testified during a public hearing. And Tesla vandals are being identified both officially and unofficially in the wake of continued graffiti attacks and damage being caused by these left-wing activists who consider private property damage justifiable. Where one middle-aged man is confronted, he's offered to clean the mess he made whilst being panicked after being caught out. This as a 70-year-old Christopher Talbot was arrested on Saturday for driving his vehicle into a Trump supporter outside a Tesla dealership. Talbot was later charged with aggravated battery with the use of a deadly weapon. And a team of January 6 research experts, survivors and advocates are using artificial intelligence software in efforts to expose DC federal judges' ruthless and unconstitutional tactics during January 6 trials over the past few years, and they've uncovered a lot of conflicts of interests. Nicola.
And just on a little British addition to the headlines, there is something really quite staggering happening in the Lake District. It's what we call in England a bit of an eyesore. The construction of a £2.5 million, that's about 6, 7, 8 million Australian dollars, mosque on the edge of the Lake District. Now, the Lake District isn't considered an area of natural beauty. It's heritage listed. You're not allowed to drop without, like an empty packet of crisps, chips, without breaking the law, because it's so beautiful at the Lake District. And they're building this awful looking eyesore, big concrete mega mosque. The South Lakes Islamic Center says the facility will be used by more than 100 local Muslim families, and the work must continue non-stop. The congregation members currently have a 100-mile round trip to their nearest place of worship. comes after full planning permission was granted for the site in 2022. Goodness knows how, with the charity confirming construction began earlier this month. Now, in a caveat to that story, the builders involved in the mega mosque have pulled out due to public pressure in the area, and it's looking like that build might collapse. Not collapse as in fall down, but collapse as in a venture. It's absolutely staggering what's happening in the UK. And again, this is all part of our cultures, our Christian constitutional cultures being marginalized. And that's not Islamophobic to say, surely an area previously heritage listed and of, outstanding natural beauty shouldn't have this enormous concrete structure built on it. I wouldn't want a Freemason temple built on it either. I wouldn't want anything to do, like I wouldn't want a Baptist giant megachurch built there either. It's extraordinary when you see the photos where they've placed it in a valley. And this is what I say about the voting. If you don't put your pen to paper, we're handing our countries over. And the bigger plan is obviously very dark and quite dire, and we're being kept out of it. And just feel completely betrayed by the King, Jason. It's an absolute disgrace.
The King of England is the most compromised individual I've ever seen. I think he's the weakest king that God ever put breath into. When I asked Gavin Ashenden in that interview that I often refer to, and the reason I do is I think it's the best interview I ever did out of some 700, I asked him, how, given what we now know about the House of Windsor and the fact that you were the Queen's chaplain, what do you think, and paraphrasing, what do you think the longevity of the House of Windsor is? And he said, I predict its downfall in William's lifetime.
Yeah.
So it has got like something that's got, enormous,
Look, I like a
thousands of years of
multicultural society. I'm a migrant to this country myself over 30 years ago. But this rapid change that they're doing is dizzying. It's the only way I can describe it. And the fact that there is no consultation in any way, public consultation with people who live in areas or, have always grown up in areas, I find extraordinary, because what they haven't done, Jason, is they haven't given us a justification for it. As something happened with Christianity or Catholicism, and I know I don't trust the Vatican and the Catholic Church as far as I can throw them. I've always known that there's something very wrong there. But, we've all been raised in our countries under these Christian constitutions. And, I was raised Church of England, and I went to Sunday school, and we were all taught to behave and be good people. And it feels like a trick, like a trap, because I always worried about that as a parent with my 3 kids. I knew that I was raising them to be good people, to be moral people, to do the right thing and be nice, be a pleasant member of society. And I said to them recently, one of my kids works with someone who does a lot of drugs, and she's quite abusive, and she has quite a powerful position, and it's just really uncomfortable, and they're sort of in shock that this person behaves that way. And I thought, have I almost given my children a handicap because I've raised them to be good people in a world where there are so many people that are not? And I can only assume there are people out there raising their children not to be good people, raising them to lie and cheat and achieve what they want at any cost. Because the same thing is this way with the way we were raised religiously. We were raised to be good people, and now the people who raised us to be good are being bad, and it just feels like a trick. What's going on?
Well, again, I'll quote Ashenden when he says that what we're seeing now is an alliance between the globalists, and that includes King Charles, who is breaching his role as the head of the British Empire. And therefore, you're meaning the World Economic Forum, the WHO, the United Nations, Bill Gates, those guys. That's the globalists. Then you've got the Marxists. So now you're talking about what's happening within the US and the Democrat Party that's become literally wanting communism, DEI, unlimited USAID funding. These are all examples of what Marxists want. And what is Marxism? It is the rise of the worker to take over the business as a factor of production. In other words, you aggregate all your workers together, and then because they are working to create within a business that therefore creates profit, that they enjoy the vast majority of the spoils because it's up to them. Now, the problem is it's a naive approach because at the end of the day, you can always find somebody else to replace you. Everyone's replaceable. But the business itself that everyone is dependent on is not necessarily the thing that's replaceable. You can't just take Coca-Cola and have a collapse there and rename it tomorrow John's Brown fizzy drink. It's not going to sell. So there's more to it. And this is what we know in politics.
But the big owners, the business owners, they never, this is what I said before, they never level down, you know. That's the thing about socialism. There's always the guys at the top. It's like for thee, but not for me, right?
So what they're doing, therefore, is that they're creating a separate power structure. They're saying, the Marxists are saying, well, we're going to take over. If we can get enough power to keep this thing alive, we're going to take over said business. But then within that set of workers, yes, you're right, they create their own hierarchy. So you've got a hierarchy now within a hierarchy, which is white-anting the system that's meant to work. So they're the Marxists. And as we read out yesterday, those two comments, Marxism, links to socialism, links to communism. And if I just go down and find you the meme again, which was quoting Winston Churchill here, when Churchill said, socialism is the philosophy of failure, the creed of ignorance, and the gospel of envy. The inherent virtue of socialism is the equal sharing of misery. And Ronald Reagan, I think, said it best when he said, socialism only works in two places: heaven, where they don't need it, and hell, where they already have it. And that's the point that we're going there. And so you have globalists teaming with Marxists, teaming with what I'm going to term Islamic over-migration or an infiltration of the West. And each of these three groups have got together, and their plan is to create for them what is for them to dominate is a one world government. And the way they were going to achieve it was to take out the United States, which they had full complicitness from Barack Obama and Joe Biden and total resistance from Donald Trump. And that's what we're in. So if we look at one side, remember, it's all 50-50s. If we look at globalism versus nationalism, we've got the globalists teaming with the Marxists, teaming with Islamic over-migration against the US. And here's where it gets so interesting. Who is the US's most interesting ally when it comes to the whole idea of Ukraine? It's Russia. And what's Russia? A Christian state, for goodness sake. So why would we be enemies with Russia provided we can come to an agreement? So what is Trump doing? He's talking about Greenland to bring together support geopolitically and geographically so that Russia can't overreach. So that's kind of what AUKUS is meant to be in Australia. Whilst China's our greatest trading partner, we literally build a defence system by people further away for their interests rather than ours. So Australia, we're confused. We are servants to three masters. We're servants to the British Empire, who's a globalist. We're servants to China, who's our largest customer. And we're servants to America in the sense that we're trying to keep this ally going so that we can protect ourselves.
Well, that's what I say. Australia's being used like a cheap hooker, right? We're just pimped out to everyone. I know that's a horrible turn of phrase, but it's true. And I feel like, what have we done? Like, what have we done wrong that we're not good enough anymore, that we don't have a say, that we have this, facade that these are our countries? I mean, we're the people who made these countries so great and so attractive that other cultures want to move here, right? And I ask myself time and again, well, what did we do wrong? Why are we being discounted? Why are we being ignored? Why are we being marginalized? Why are we being censored and shut up? And the only thing I can ever bring it down to when I whittle it down is that we don't have any money left. We're too broke because they've debt slaved us into a corner. We're backed into a corner, and they don't have anything else to take from us. They're like highwaymen, right? And they've pulled us over on the side of the road, and we're out. We don't have any gold bars or any jewelry left. And so they need new people to highway rob, and so new people to come and get into debt slavery. And it's the only answer I have. And the new Australians do seem to have not more disposable income as such. They're not turning up. They're not turning up rich, although some of them do seem to be. But they are turning up with the ability to go into debt. They want the house, they want the car, they want the loans, they want the finance. And Australians are strapped and they can't do that. I mean, I know I can't. I'm not in a position now. There's a new car that I desperately want to buy, and boy, do I need it after being in my old Rattler for a decade. But I've got expensive tastes, and the new car I want is $100,000, and I can't afford it, and I can't even afford to get finance for it. I can't afford to go into debt for it, right? And I work in the automotive industry, and I still can't afford to do it. And so, I think we're squeezed. We're too squeezed. We can't do anything. We can't go anywhere. Our options have have run out, so they're bringing people in who've got options, and it's just so unfair that they're doing this. And and it leads into that other thing you were talking about with regard to weapons. You were talking about weapons purchases. Who are these weapons for? Who are they meant to protect us against, right? Let's say Australia buys all the nuclear submarines they want and all the weaponry, and we've got all the American bases. Like, who are we protecting ourselves against? Our major trading partner, China? I mean, what's going on? Surely, if there's a genuine threat to us, we wouldn't be doing business with the genuine threat, would we? Nothing's making sense, Jason.
Well, it's an interesting point, isn't it? Dutton said no country of our standing in the history of the world has ever been in a position of strength through having a weak defence force. Any adversary looking at us over the course of the next century will look at the capabilities that we've got, which is exactly the reason why we negotiated so hard with the US and the UK when he was Defence Minister to negotiate the AUKUS submarine deal. He argues the AUKUS submarines, particularly on an island nation like us, will underpin our security for the next century. And he's arguing we need to invest more in that. So Trump says peace through strength. Dutton has taken a line there and run his own thing. So that's an interesting perspective. There's one perspective there. I argue that we've been spread too thin. We are a country that wants to be a pleaser. We have weak leaders who go along to get along, and once they're in a system, again, going back to my
compromised. They're obviously compromised in one direction or the other. We've probably got some that are compromised in the American direction and some that are compromised in the Chinese direction, and it's like, flip of a coin, which one we get.
Well, yes, when I was in the in the ALP, I remember there was four of us in a pre-selection. I was I'd only been in the party a year or something at that stage, and I was the youngest of the four of us. And there was one particular fellow who I never knew him, and he started turning up, but he was apparently a member of a different branch. And he was an academic, and he really fancied himself. And he'd turn up at these different speeches, and he'd get up there and he'd say, "I'm the only one of these four of us that has the capability to become a minister, and I'm sick and tired of us having backbenchers only in this area." That was his attitude. And then privately, he'd come up to me and he'd say, "Head office is not happy with you." I go, "Is that right?" He says, "Yeah." He said, "I'm a party man." He said, "I'm a party man. I will do what head office says."
Oh, God.
And I said, "Well, good for you, mate." And then it turned out, then he kept coming at me and he white-handed me, and they both did. And then he came up to me again and he said, "You have a website, don't you?" I said, "Indeed I do. It's called mygreenway.com.au, which is no longer around." I set this up about 2005, and it was about my electorate, which was Greenway at the time, but it was a political enthusiast site. I presented news, I had beautiful speeches, I had historic stuff, I had clips from political movies, I had political songs. It was a great website. And I could tell back then when I was getting into it, I used to get about 5,000 visits a day, and where the people were coming from. And a lot of educators were using it, like actually at .edu.au were going to it to get information to teach. I was thrilled that this was going so well. So anyway, this particular character makes a phone call to head office, and I get a call one day from a woman who is now elected in the New South Wales State Parliament and rather high up. And she says to me, you've got a website. Take that down." I go, "Excuse me, who is this calling?" Like, that was exactly how the conversation started. And I'm calling from Labor head office. You're not allowed to have a website. It says so in the rules. I said, "Are you telling me that I can't own shares in eBay?" And she didn't know what to say. I says, "You're telling me all websites are out." And the argument was that we couldn't have our own personal website without the approval of the content that was on there not coming from ALP head office. So I told her where to go and I wasn't taking it down. And then they threatened me to remove my pre-selection nomination or whatever. And then they used that to white-ant me. And
Well, these are what we used to call in the UK company men, right? They'll do whatever they're told. They're good soldiers. And look, everyone needs a good soldier. I consider my husband my good soldier, and I'm his good soldier. But I worried when King Charles III came to Australia recently. A couple of weird things happened. He visited the recently sold land titles office, now owned by the second largest super fund in Australia. And I thought, well, King Charles III must be involved in that second largest super fund in Australia. Otherwise, why would he visit the offices? It was the first appointment he had. He also handed Anthony Albanese, aka the Labour Party, the seal, a new seal, so that he didn't have to wait for royal assent to do things. He already had the seal and he could get things done, which is a dictatorship, right? That's not how it's supposed to run as a Commonwealth. And there was also a short clip of him and some photographs where he had a meeting with both Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton. And Anthony Albanese's body language, it wasn't quite as easy for Dutton because he's a very tall man and he's bigger than King Charles III, but Albanese's a little sleazy worm. Um, Albanese's body language was so deferential. He was almost sort of, and I know people do bow to royalty, but he was sort of bowing and cowering, and the king put his hand on his shoulder, and it did feel very Freemasony, you know, like congratulations for doing my bidding kind of thing. And it reminded me of that picture of Daniel Andrews at a function, and he was sitting at a dinner table, and it was a very busy room. And Joe Biden was there. And this was, I think, before Joe Biden was president. And Joe Biden put his hand on Daniel Andrews' shoulder. Same thing, right? Same motion. And Daniel Andrews, there's this photo of him looking like a puppy that's just been patted. He couldn't have looked more like a cat that got the cream if he'd tried. And you know, these people are being paid as, on paper, public servants, but they are serving a different master, and it's not the public. So that is why there's this movement about not voting, because you're voting to give their real masters more power by getting them in. So I understand that. My theory is there are people who are not getting touched on the shoulder, that are not part of it, not yet, at least. And it's, you know, I'd like to see a government that's primarily independent. And people say, oh, that would be a nightmare. It would be a disaster every time you televised, you know, a debate or whatever. Everyone would be screaming at each other and disagreeing. That's what I think democracy and politics should be. That's when there's a genuine vote, because then you don't have this, you know, branch stacking thing where you've got 40 people on one side agreeing with one narrative and 40 people on the other side agreeing with a different narrative, the red and the blue. And the little independent voices, well, you're never going to get heard because there's only one or two of you. Right, which is where we are now. What I want is all 40 on both sides having a different opinion. And when the vote comes, it's more genuine. Isn't that what democracy is supposed to be, Jason?
Supposed to be. And this is, again, you know, idealism versus reality. It's difficult to understand that these are not the same things. And just because something is hard doesn't mean you don't try. The opposite. But I know everyone's exhausted. But here's the point: it's now game day. This is what's so fabulous about an election cycle, is all of a sudden things count. I tell you what's hard though, is knocking on someone's door and starting a conversation. It's harder to knock on someone's door and ask them to put your core flute up. It's
Especially
harder
when they've lost their faith in politics.
Yes, it's even harder to go put your core flutes up in spaces and see them being ripped down, and then finding that here's another.
No, there was that clip. Did you see that clip this week of a guy from the Teals ripping down everyone else's core flutes? That was caught on
Absolutely.
film. And Jason, I just want to. Someone's just sent me a headline from the Guardian, and I just want to tell you about it. So it's the Guardian. You can look it up. And the subheadline is Universal Basic Income. And the main headline is Money for Nothing is Universal Basic Income about to transform society. Someone's posted it and said this, and I think it's very wise. Universal Basic Income won't be money for nothing. You'll need to, let me credit this person, Dean Power. You'll need to jump through numerous dystopian hoops to be eligible. You'll require digital ID. It will only be paid out in the form of central bank digital currency, and forget about receiving any payments until you're fully vaccinated or your social credit score will be too low. And once you've become dependent on it, you can kiss goodbye to your free will and autonomy. The goalposts will be moved perpetually in an ever more dystopian direction. This is in The Guardian. Money for nothing is universal basic income about to transform society. And of course, the person featured in this story, who looks like a very young sort of lefty, but of course there's no diversity. She's a young white girl. This is what they want you to do, while all of the new Australians are getting ABNs and starting businesses. And I know that for a fact. There's no diversity in this Guardian story. What is going on, Jason? This is literally what they want our kids to jump onto.
Well, the person who wrote it's exactly right. It's fairly obvious, isn't it, that if you are going to, there's no such thing as a free lunch. So that if you think you're going to be given a universal basic income, which is effectively another fancy name for an unemployment benefit, but it's more glorified, and technically people think that it means that they're going to get more. It doesn't. It just means a universal basic income. Everyone gets $500 a week before they start, 300, whatever it is, and you participate. But for many people, they'd say, I don't want $500 a week, even if it benefits me, or I don't need $500 a week. I have enough of my own money. Would be,
Look,
their argument.
if someone said to me, my mindset is this: if someone said to me, you can have $500 a week for free to sit home and do nothing, or sit home and do my podcasts, I'll be doing a hell of a lot more of them, or $600 a week, just a touch more to go to work and feel good about myself and be independent as to where I get that income, I'd go for the independence. But that's just me.
And therein lies the rub, because the globalists under that umbrella are the ones proposing a UBI. I'll guarantee you right now there'll be no UBI in Trump's America, just as there'll be no CBDCs. He's already said that they're banned in the United States. So it becomes clearer and clearer of what's actually going on here. And Australia stuck, unsure of what's going on, a political movement led by still the majority of the Uni Party, a third party movement that is trying to do the best it can, but is fighting over the spoils at the moment in various different ways. And we can talk about the Australia First Alliance, we can talk about the Trumpet of Patriots, One Nation, and then the micro parties that work around those. And look, there's plenty of good people and there are plenty of political operatives, and it's going through its teething phase, but at the very least it's restructuring. 2025 looks very different to 2022, but if you come out on the other side and there's a disappointing outcome in 2025 and perhaps a minority government, then you've got to ask some serious questions about what's going on. But I feel like what's happening is the choices are becoming clearer, and what I'm noticing on this show now is people are starting to realise that whilst we talk about things in the moment, we're also able to look ahead at different directions, and we're very good at that. We can point out the negatives, and we can also point out the positives. Now,
Are we
negatives.
being lulled into being losers? That's what they're saying to the domestic populations. I'm sorry to break it down and make it so basic. I think the domestic populations and their children and grandchildren are being lulled into an idea of being a loser, and that's fine to be that in society, and government supports it. And they'll say, oh, you've got mental health issues, or you were a bit depressed when you were 15 and a half and put a bit of weight on, or, your parents were divorced or whatever. Or, as long as they can get you on board with that. And it's like I said yesterday, Jason, when I did my speech, people came up and said the people who don't oppose the government are people on Centrelink, which will become universal basic income, and those who are retired on government pensions. And this is how they control society. It's
Mhm.
literally hush money, right? They're paying you off to be quiet.
That's right. Well, see, you've got a choice now. You've got globalist politics, uni party again, teaching hopelessness,
Yeah.
making you dependent, and selling you UBI. And what's Trump doing? Like he's done all along. He's showing you how to become resilient, to grow a thick skin against the critics, and to become self-sufficient. And how do we know that that's the truth? Because he's proposing no income tax. Could you be any more self-sufficient if you were given nothing, but then they said we're not going to take anything either. You go out and look after yourself, and we're going to create a society that is thriving, full of opportunity, and we're going to create encouragement, and therefore we're going to build a better society. That's exactly where this is. This is why I keep talking about the 51st state.
Yeah.
This is exactly where we're at.
Now, apparently, people are talking on X. I've been sent a couple of links here that Trump has launched a chemtrail task force with the power to arrest geoengineering criminals. And I know they have addressed this. The Trump administration, alongside with RFK Jr., has just declared an all-out war on chemtrails. They're not whispering about it anymore. They're forming a task force, and they're coming for the planes, the pilots, the scientists, and the shadowy overlords who bankroll this aerial assault on humanity. Whatever you think about Trump and his administration, I think that's actually a good thing. We can all see it in the sky. I have no idea why they've decided to block out the sun. The sun is worshipped by multiple cultures. It features on multiple flags, the Aboriginal flag, the Japanese flag. There are flags all over this world. They say they want to support Indigenous Australians. Well, Indigenous Australians hold ceremonies worshipping and thanking the sun. And so they haven't explained that to us. we're not taking measures here in 2025 that will affect the world in 50 million years' time. I simply don't believe them because nothing can stop the sun from dying. And so I think this is a good thing. And if that's exposed the way, everything else is being exposed, and we find out why this chemtrail, this engineering of it was begun, then I think it would be such a shock for humanity, because we're going to learn that the most heinous chemicals have been dropped on us and our crops, and it's affecting people. Like today, you may notice I've got a funny voice. I'm coughing a little bit because my allergies are playing up again, and I haven't had allergies for about 7 years. So we need to find out what's going on. So I applaud that, Jason. I think we're getting towards the end of the show, buddy.
Another show. We're just burning up the minutes as we put together the news of the day. Thanks everyone for the wonderful comments yesterday. Please continue to put what you're thinking about the show, where you want us to head, what directions, and keep providing the challenges. Just know this: as we move through this election cycle, there's no such thing as a perfect human being, and certainly when it comes to politics, the bar gets dropped even lower. But also remember that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and politics is indeed a blood sport.
Yeah. And look, there's no perfect people. I will just say it. I'm not a perfect person. I try to be. I try to be a perfect person. And I'm sure, had I been successful in my run for the Senate, or should I decide to run for the Senate again in the future and give up my British citizenship and all that kind of stuff, it would be a bit of a long road for me. And I certainly do want to stay active in politics in Australia. They would find things that were wrong with me also, right? Even for those people who are my biggest fans. And, it was said to me by a sitting politician in Australia, Nicola, if they can't find the dirt on you, they'll just make it up, right? So you've got to remember that, okay? Because the machinery behind this is so vast and so large that if they feel that spanner in the works is effective, and this is why they take down certain social media pages like mine, and others certainly took Jason down off Facebook. When you are effective, they seek to silence you because you literally can influence. And this show, I guess, is a political influence show. That's the way it's sort of organically evolved. But we're not trying to drive you in a particular direction. We're just trying to drive you in a direction where you think about what you're doing, because it's very, very important. So do bear that in mind when you see lots of negativity about politicians. You need to understand there is machinery behind it to take them out. And the politicians who are really doing their worst, it was like this stuff with RFK, right? That was all personal, and it was all to do with his marriage and another girl. You're going to hold this person's feet to the fire for something that is personal, when there are literally leaders and senators and MPs and congressmen around this planet who are putting pen to paper for motions and legislations and acts they know will kill people, will break people, will drive people to suicide. And yet you're not holding their feet to the fire. You're holding them to the fire because over a personal issue. They will always find something to take out the good guys, and I would implore you to remember that. Thank you for listening to the Daily Australian, to myself, Nicola Charles, and my co-host and co-producer, Jason Olborn, who's always a wealth of knowledge. We will do this all over again tomorrow.